Ичкерия News. С вами Ахмед Закаев. Сейчас мы вам покажем. Мы находимся в здании Европейского Парламента. Специальная сессия, на которой Ахмед Закаев будет иметь свою речь. И также выступят другие очень интересные спикеры. Ахмед Закаев будет выступать четвертым с начала нашей трансляции. Здесь присутствуют евродепутаты. Я уже включаю трансляцию.
Good morning. It's very misty and gray Brussels morning, yet I'm happy to open this conference. I'm Anna Fatiga, Polish member of the European Parliament, and together with my colleagues Kosmas Złotowski, Robert of Poland, Robert Zile of Latvia, and Alexander Sasha Vondra of Czechia. We have the pleasure to welcome you to this conference hosted by the ECR, group of the European Parliament. I welcome the chair of conferences, forums of Free Nations of post-Russia, Oleg Megaletsky and his co-workers, as well as all distinguished panelists. Will introduce them one by one before their contributions. The title of this fifth edition of the conference is about Imperial Russia, conquest, genocide, and colonization. And of course, everything happens in the context of the war of aggression waged by Russian Federation on Ukraine in 2014, and then escalating in such violent, bloody, and criminal way, actually, on February 24th. All of us stand by Ukraine. We do our utmost in order to help Ukraine win this war and push the invader out of the territory as internationally recognized, as I simply stated, including Crimea, of course. And here in the European Parliament, with the absolute vast majority of MEPs in every resolution taken, despite recent events for many years already, we are very resolute and decided. Our time is limited, and we have many outstanding speakers, panelists representing both US, Western Europe, my region, Central and Eastern Europe. There are representatives of Ukraine, but actually what is the most important, there are representatives of free nations living within the borders of Russian Federation, and we would like to discuss diagnosis, problems, and possible scenarios for future Russia. Without much ado, I'd like to start first panel that is brought over historic context background of the imperial ideology, because we are going to discuss imperialism of Russia, and ideology starting with Muscovy to the Russian order to Russian mayor. We'll like to discuss conquest and exploitation, and starting with times over ages, starting with times of Ivan the Terrible until current times, so presidency of Vladimir Putin, aggressive policies, ending with the war on Ukraine, and hopefully with defeat of current Russian order, also after defeating Russia in this war. I state it simply, and I know that not all of members of international experts agree with me, but I put this quite openly. Without much ado, because our time is limited, I would like to start the first panel that I have the pleasure and privilege of moderating. And our first speaker is Professor Brian Williams, well-known American scholar, the tenure professor at University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, lecturer of the University of London, and what is most, from my point, also contributor to very prestigious and diverse media outlets, both within the US and overseas. But what is most important, I would like to tell about his two books. They are very relevant for today's discussions. The Crimean Tatars, and the topic is particularly dear to me, and the Chechen Inferno. Professor, floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. And, wait.
Sorry. Micro.
Hey, thank you for the introduction and
Microphone.
oh, cool. No, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. What I'm going to try to do today is take you through the almost inexorable advance of Russia from the small state of Rus all the way over towards Alaska, down into Kazakhstan, and of course into the Crimea. I'm going to try to do as quickly as possible in the 10 minutes allotted to me. And I'm going to do something I think might be interesting. I'm going to compare this in some ways to America's inexorable advance over the Appalachians and across the West. So I'll begin this journey by going back in time to the time of Ivan Grozny. It was under Grozny that the Russians made the first transition from being a kingdom or a tsardom or a state to becoming an empire by moving over the Ural Mountains and crossing into Siberia. This is very similar to the English and Native Americans crossing from the Appalachian Mountains into the lands of the Plains Indians. My journey will take us from the area in green there, Russia, up in the forest, across that vast area in pink, which is the Golden Horde. We're going to go across Siberia and down into Central Asia and down towards the Caucasus and the Crimea. So this journey begins with the first conquest, which is the Tatar Khanate of Kazan by Ivan Grozny. 1550s, they move into Kazan and later into Siberia. This shows it better. Kazan right there, sorry. So this is the Kazan Khanate, as you had with American Indians or Native Americans in America. One group called the Krishans, of course, Christian Tatars. From there, they moved down into the Nogai Horde, and also into Siberia, Siberian Khanate. Of course, you all know the same famous St. Basil's Cathedral, built to honor this conquest of Kazan under Ivan Grozny, Ivan the Terrible. This map, I think, captures the truly epic nature of Russia's inexorable conquest, moving across the vast forest, the taiga of Siberia, eventually going to Kamchatka and crossing over into Alaska. This is a famous painting of Yermak, the Cossacks, moving through the vast forest of Siberia, clashing with the animist or Sufi Muslim peoples living in the vastness of Siberia. Meanwhile, this is happening at the same time they're having these conquests in the New World by the Spanish. Cortez, Pizarro are moving across Mexico, Peru, using the same technology, modern European technology, to crush the indigenous peoples, the Incas or the Aztecs in the New World. And here we see the native people of Alaska. This is actually in the border of Alaska and Siberia, taken in the early 1900s. And of course, this conquest led to the collapse of many of these ancient societies. The Tuvans are famous for their Buddhist society. Their society, in many ways, fell apart under Russian conquest. We know Tuvans are being used today as cannon fodder in the war against Ukraine, which is not really their war, but it led to the collapse of many of their ancient traditions and culture. And this map, I think, is important in capturing the scale of Russia's conquest. Look at the bottom there, you see the subcontinent of India. Look at how small India is compared to this area called Yakutia, which is rich in resources. We have the Yakuts. And this map, I think, is useful in capturing the conquest of Siberia. I'm now going to move south from the forest, from the taiga of Siberia, into the land of the Kazakhs. Kazakhs, the Sufi Muslim descendants of the Golden Horde. So there are three sort of major Kazakh tribes, or hordes, three Kazakh hordes, the great, middle, and small horde. And below them, of course, are the land of the Uzbeks. This conquest of the open plains was made possible by new technology. Faster loading weapons, tabors, wagons created by the Cossacks to go out in the open plains and clash with the Kazakhs, who'd always been hard to defeat because they were such skilled horse archers. Remember, these are the descendants of the Golden Horde, still using those tactics. But by the 1700s, when the Russians moved south into the open steppes, their archery is no longer able to defeat the Russians, who have better weapons, firearms, small cannons, etc. This movement down south into the lands of the Kazakhs was similar in some ways to the American movements into the lands of the Sioux Indians, Cheyenne. The Indians are Native Americans of the open plains of America, and it led to the disruption of ancient migration patterns going back to the Scythians, or the Scythi in Podolsky. So this is sort of the death of the great nomadic culture of the Kazakhs as they got absorbed by Russia and, of course, ultimately colonized and brought into the Soviet Union, where their society is completely disrupted. Once again, these migration patterns go back to the ancient European Scythians, thousands and thousands of years old, destroyed by this settlement, just as the native indigenous Americans colonies, patterns destroyed by white man's colonization. Finally, of course, having conquered the Kazakhs, by the 1800s, the Russians moved south into the three Khanates of Uzbekistan. In the process, the name Turkestan, which goes back over 1,000 years, was ultimately removed from the map. And today, most people have never heard the word Turkestan. This is a famous painting by Vereshchagin, Russian soldiers fighting against Uzbeks south of the Kazakhs. Now I'm moving towards the west, into Ukraine, the frontier. This was known as the Dikaya Polya, the wild fields. And for centuries, the Russians were unable to move down onto these open plains due to the fact that the Tatars were so invincible. The Tatars did slave raids deep into Russia. The Tatars burned Moscow as late as 1571, carrying away Slovens and Russians as slaves down to Crimea. Crimea comes from the Mongol word Krim, which means fortress. And in many ways, the Crimea was a natural fortress for the Turco-Muslim world to stop the Slavs, to stop the Russians from moving south into the open plains, the Dikaya Polya, of what's today Ukraine, the frontier. Of course, we know that Ukrainians had their own separate culture at this time period. There's a major effort on the part of the Putin administration to deny Ukraine's identity, to say, oh, they're just little Russians. But we know that Ukrainians, as we see this map here, had hundreds of years of Western influence on the Poles and Lithuanians. Of course, later, they break up and form these free groups known as the Cossacks. Same origin as the word Kazakh, a freebooter, a free-roaming egalitarian people. The most famous Cossacks, of course, the Cossacks of the Zaporozhian fortress down in the lower part of Ukraine. They had an organic, almost indigenous, free form of democracy that was vastly different to serfdom, which you find under Russia. And don't forget, when the Russians did expand into these lands, they brought serfdom with them, a form of slavery that many of these ethnic groups had never had before. For example, when they conquered the Crimea, the Tatars had always been free under their own mirs, their chieftains. But when the Russians came in, they confiscated the land, blew up many of the mosques, and forced the collapse of the ancient Crimean Tatar people. In the purple here, you can see the Zaporozhian Cossacks, right there squeezed between the Crimean Khanate, the expanding Russian Empire, and Poland, a sort of free zone of free egalitarian Cossacks. This painting, the famous painting by Repin, I think captures the real egalitarian friendship and democracy of the original Ukrainian Cossacks of Zaporozhye. Of course, Zaporozhye today is a major power plant that's being controlled by the Russians. Now, this movement of Russia from the Kazakh lands and down south into Ukraine ultimately brings them down in confrontation of the Crimean Khanate. This Khanate extended, as you see, from Moldova across the southern Ukraine all the way over to Circassia and acted as a shield, protecting these regions from Slavic expansion. When this area was conquered in 1774 by Catherine the Great, it led to the complete collapse of this society. I should mention, there's a lot of propaganda about the Crimean Tatars. The Russians like to define them often as being Mongols. But if you live with the Crimean Tatars, as I've done, you'll see that their faces are very, very much pre-Mongol. Their origins go back to the Crimean Goths, the Crimean Greeks, and other groups that are centuries older than the Mongol Golden Horde. Of course, the Baghchisarai Garden Palace there in Crimea is the last example of Mongol palatial architecture in Europe. So the Crimea was independent from this time period here, but in 1783, ironically, the year that America achieved independence, the Crimea lost its independence and led to a complete collapse of this society. Most of the Tatars, by the way, lived in the south, in the yellow there, in the Yaila Mountains. There were two groups of Tatars. One are called Nogais. Nogais are almost like Kazakhs, or are wandering tribes of Kazakhstan, whereas the ones in the south are called Tats. And they're ancient people with blue eyes, blonde hair, going back to the Crimean Goths, although they both call themselves Crimean Tatars. Once again, the collapse of society led to mass migrations of Crimean Tatars engaging in hijra, religious immigration from Crimea to the Ottoman Empire. They called the Ottoman Empire Ak Toprak, white soil. It was seen as salvation for them to escape their mosques being burnt, the graveyards of their ancestors being destroyed, and of course all the land being confiscated by Russian pomeshchiks, large landowners. Here's some pictures I took while living in the Crimea. This is the Crimean Tatars' palace there at Baghchisarai. And what you see, they're not all sort of Mongol physiognomy. Many of them have this pre-Mongol look to their faces. These are Samozakhat, self-seized settlements in the Yaila Mountains of southern Crimea. This is Mustafa Jamilov, the head of the Crimean Tatars. Standards. This collapse of the Crimea, the fortress Crimea, ultimately led to the migration of the Russians towards the northern Caucasus. Now that the Tatars were gone, these almost unbeatable Tatar archers, once the cavalry forces of the Crimean Khan had been defeated, it opened up. And this leads, of course, to the destruction of Circassia. If you look on this map, you will see four great nations in the Caucasus at this time period: Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, and the green there, Circassia. Most people on the planet have never heard of Circassia. I was at a conference in New York of Armenians, and they proudly told me, well, not proudly, but sadly, Armenia had the world's first modern genocide in Europe. I asked them, haven't you heard of the Circassians? They'd never even heard of the Circassians. This nation had its own rich history. Much of the traditions we think of being Caucasian come from Circassia. Here we can see in the purple area there, the beginning of the Russian conquest of Circassia. This conquest is achieved by massive imperial armies burning and chopping down the forest. You cannot conquer the free Circassians or the tribes to the east in Dagestan and Chechnya unless you destroy the forest where they fought back from and waged almost guerrilla war, insurgency. I call this the Battle of the Axe. The Russians systematically destroyed one of the largest forests in Europe, and now when you go to the Northern Caucasus, these ancient forests going back millennia are missing, chopped down to allow the Russians with a much larger imperial armies to move in and conquer these areas by about 1864. You see the legendary Circassians. And of course, the collapse of Circassia, which my colleague will discuss, by 1860s, led to the mass migration of Circassians down into Ottoman Empire. I spent a lot of time living in Turkey, and there's many, many people in Turkey today who have the features of Circassia. Of course, I also found Circassians living in Israel, in Kapakama. I found them way down south where the Ottoman Sultan settled them. And of course, this leads, once Circassia gets destroyed, it leads to subjugation of Imam Shamil and the defense of the combined Chechen, Ingush, and Dagestani forces to the east. So, in many ways, as an American, we are taught that our people, our ancestors, the English, and of course Americans who moved, as you see in the picture here, across the open plains, engaged in genocide. We are taught to be embarrassed by this bloody conquest of the free Native American people, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, Cherokee, Navajo, etc. We honor them in many ways, but we were taught that this is almost like a collective sin on the part of our nation, the Americans. Back in the 1800s, they called it manifest destiny. The English called it the white man's burden. The French called it mission sur le service. Russians did it for the honor of the Tsar, orthodoxy, and of course, the Russian nation. Today, we know it by a different name, genocide. Thank you.
Professor Williams, thank you very much indeed for this broad overview. You mentioned so frequently the fate of Circassians nation, and actually we are proud to host for the second time here in the Parliament representative, a brave representative of this nation, Fatima Keys, who used to be activists speaking up about Circassians' rights within the Russian Federation and endangered there, evacuated to the United States, now serving as journalists in the Voice of America. We had already a conference dedicated uniquely to genocide of Circassians. Genocide is in the title of our conference, so it is inevitable to speak about modern age genocide first happening to Circassians on territory of Russia by Russia. Fatima, floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you again for inviting me here, and thank you for giving this floor and this tribune to my people whom I represent proudly today. As you heard,
Премьер-министра Чеченской Республики Ичкерия Ахмед Закаева. Выступление будет на русском языке, переводчик для этого не потребуется.
Began 200 years ago, Circassia was eliminated. its territories annexed, its people exterminated and deported. We are approaching the 9-year anniversary of Russia's colonial aggression in Ukraine. Similar, what we see in Ukraine was experienced by my nation, my people. There are at least 6 times more Circassians living abroad than there are Circassians remaining in their occupied by motherland, occupied by Russia. I was born and raised in the Circassian mountains, and when I grew up, I visited as a journalist Circassian diasporas in many countries. They are doctors, scholars, entrepreneurs. They are politicians, generals, builders, bakers. They are assets to their new homes, to their new countries. And like in their new countries, their new countries are different from each other. The Circassians living in those countries are different too. But they have things in common. For instance, they are all longing for Circassia, for the home Russia has taken from them. In the Circassian language, the word for nation is translated as a foundation. Again, nation in Circassian is a foundation. Today, Circassians of the world live deprived of their foundation. With every passing day, there are less Circassians speaking their mother tongue. There are less Circassians who identify themselves as Circassians, and less Circassians who have connection with their foundation, their shop. We often hear the phrase, the 19th century genocide of Circassians by Russia, as if Russia's destruction of the Circassian nation was a one-time event that had a beginning and the ending. That is a wrong concept. The Circassians are at the brink of extinction. Re-establishing their nationhood, rebuilding their foundation is a matter of survival. That is a continuation of a genocide. The Circassians today are deeply infiltrated and corroded by the Russian intelligences. They are divided and confused. But most importantly, they are losing hope for ever going home to their beautiful mountains. I'd like to address my people at the end of my speech today. Imagine freedom. You are doing so many great things for the countries that you call your own right now. Imagine doing those great things for your own countries, for your foundation, for your nation, for your homeland. And believe in that it is possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima, for your deeply moving contribution. Well, what we learned during the previous conference, and also Fatima's and colleagues from Georgia contribution to that conference, was the activity of Georgia in support of Circassians at a time when we just referred to literature, to 19th century literature, while speaking about Circassians or thought about history. Georgians' assessment was very clear, very political, and very visionary, and I would like to pay tribute to personal prisoner of Putin nowadays, Mikhail Saakashvili, who used to initiate need introduction. There is a hero among us. Simply, there are many of them, but he's a very special and particular person. Also not for the first time here in the European Parliament. the Prime Minister of Free Independent Chechen Republic of Ичкерия, Ахмед Закаев. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
I will speak in Russian. First of all, I приветствую участников данного форума. Прежде чем начать свое выступление, я бы хотел поблагодарить организаторов этого мероприятия за приглашение на него и за возможность здесь выступить. Затем я хочу особо поблагодарить депутата Европарламента Анну Фатыгу и в ее лице польское правительство и народ Польши за то, что за последние 28 лет они неустанно отслеживают ситуацию в Чечне и оказывают нам братскую помощь в этот трудный период нашей истории. Более 40 тысяч чеченских беженцев, спасающихся от ужасов войны, нашли приют на земле Польши. Скоро исполняется год с начала российской агрессии в Украине. И именно Польша первая пришла на помощь защитникам своей страны. Помимо всего остального, более 500 000 украинцев, 1,5 миллиона украинцев поляки приняли в своих домах. Спасибо огромное, спасибо вам большое. Теперь касательно основной темы нашей конференции о переустройстве России после ее поражения в войне с Украиной. В своем выступлении я хочу остановиться на одном из ее регионов. Северный Кавказ. В истории России всегда играл большую роль. И располагается этот регион в геополитической зоне, не только контролирующей ее России, но и ряда стран, среди которых Грузия и Азербайджан. В Российской империи менялись цари, генсеки и президенты. Менялось политическое устройство. Монархия сменилась большевизмом. Более 70 лет существовала Советская империя, на смену которой пришла псевдодемократия. Однако главная установка России в отношении кавказцев – покорить или истребить – не менялась никогда. В начале XVIII века началась активная фаза завоевания Кавказа путем заселения его территорий русскими колонистами. Процесс сопровождался миллионными жертв. В результате колонизации Кавказа миллионы людей были убиты, разорены тысячи селений, что привело к исчезновению целых кавказских народов. Убыхов, жанеевцев и хакучей. Планомерное убийство народов Кавказа усилилось с момента окончания русско-турецкой войны, когда русские войска сожгли тысячи аулов, истребив в них всех жителей, включая женщин и детей. Натиск царских войск на кавказские народы вызвал их объединение. Первое всеобщее движение северокавказских горцев против экспансии Российской империи на Кавказе в конце XVIII века было под руководством шейха Мансура. Это был ответ, направленный против жестокой колониальной политики царской России. Кавказцы имели свое историческое государство, которое несколько раз разрушалось русскими. В XIX веке имам Шамиль создал Кавказский имамат, который несколько десятилетий вел эффективную войну против России. Значительное количественное превосходство российской армии позволяло во всех случаях потопить в крови все попытки горцев на свободу в начале XX века, после Октябрьской революции. В России была провозглашена Горская республика, в которую вошли республики Северного Кавказа. Официально независимость Горской республики провозглашена 11 мая 1918 года на мирной конференции в Батуми. Территория частично признанного государства охватывала 125 тысяч квадратных километров с населением около 2,9 миллиона людей. Министерство иностранных дел Горской республики, ограниченное дипломатическим непризнанием со стороны победителей, в частности Франции и Великобритании. В этих сложных условиях Горская республика подписала договоры о признании с Османской империей, Германией, Австро-Венгрией и Болгарией. В связи с тем, что все эти страны потерпели поражение в Первой мировой войне и не играли сколь значимую роль в мировой политике, в тот период Горская республика испытывала проблемы в укреплении своей государственности. В свете продолжающейся сегодня агрессии России в Украине глубоко символичен союз Украинской Народной Республики и Горской Республики. В 1919 году был подготовлен договор между директорией Украинской Народной Республики и союзным парламентом Горской Республики. Я не буду зачитывать содержание всего договора, но мои помощники уже, я думаю, раздали или раздадут вам всем в письменном виде проект этого договора. Как мы знаем из истории, Украинская Народная Республика и Горская Республика потерпели поражение от большевиков. Царская колониальная политика сменилась диктатурой пролетариата и уничтожила все, даже самые малые ростки свободы и демократии. Несмотря на активное участие народов Кавказа в установлении Советов после своего укрепления, советская власть принялась за народы Северного Кавказа. И снова целые народы становятся врагами, начинается новая волна геноцида северокавказских народов. Чеченцы, карачаевцы, ингуши, балкарцы стали жертвами народоубийственной политики советского государства. По истечении 70 лет наступает новая эра в истории российского государства. И она сопровождается практикой устрашения, террора, убийства и насилия не только на Северном Кавказе, Молдавия, Приднестровье, Грузия, Абхазия, Осетия, Азербайджан, Нагорный Карабах, Ингушетия, Чеченская республика. Но кавказцы никогда не переставали использовать малейшую возможность для освобождения от колониального ига и возрождения своей объединенной государственности. После распада СССР чеченский народ использовал свое право на независимость, и 6 сентября 1991 года является днем восстановления государственной независимости Чеченской республики. В октябре 1991 года президент Грузии Зиад Гамсахурдия и президент Чеченской республики Джохар Дудаев стали обсуждать проект Кавказской конфедерации. Уже в декабре 1991, январе 1992 годов в Грузии произошел государственный переворот, в результате которого президент Зиад Гамсахурдия был смещен. А к власти пришел Эдуард Шеварднадзе, которого поддержала Россия. А в Чеченской республике Кремль стал формировать вооруженную оппозицию, которая должна была свергнуть всенародно избранную власть и установить пророссийский оккупационный режим. Эти попытки были безуспешны вплоть до конца 1994 года. В декабре 1994 года Россия начала широкомасштабную войну. Министр обороны Российской Федерации Павел Грачев обещал президенту Борису Ельцину навести порядок в Чечне за 2 часа одним десантным полком. Да, за 28 лет с момента начала российско-чеченской войны Россия смогла колонизировать Чеченскую республику или оккупировать и насадить свое коллаборационистское правительство, но сломить борьбу чеченского народа за свою независимость не смогла. Успешно работает правительство Чеченской республики Ичкерия в Израиле. В результате подписания договора между военными ведомствами двух стран в составе вооруженных сил Украины сегодня воюют вооруженные силы Чеченской республики Ичкерия. Чеченцы с большим воодушевлением восприняли признание Украинской Рады факт оккупации России территории Чеченской республики Ичкерия, что послужило причиной вступления в ряды вооруженных сил Чеченской республики Ичкерия большого количества добровольцев, воюющих против российского агрессора. Чеченцы уверены в том, что победа Украины в войне против России позволит деоккупировать территорию Чеченской республики и восстановить свою государственность. В настоящее время лучшие представители порабощенных и оккупированных народов Кавказа воюют на украинском фронте, отбивая атаки врага и освобождая оккупированные земли Украины. Есть уверенность в том, что мужественный и героический отпор украинской армии российским захватчикам и мировая поддержка борьбы хребет российским агрессорам. В связи с вышесказанным хочу призвать участников данного форума обратиться к международному сообществу, руководствуясь общепринятыми принципами и нормами международного права, такими как о праве нации на самоопределение, резолюция Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН 2105 от 12 декабря от 20 декабря 1965 года, 26-25 от 24 ноября 1970 года, Декларацию ООН о правах коренных народов от 13 ноября 2007 года за номером 61/295, обратиться к парламентам и лидерам государств-членов ООН с воззванием о признании права на самоопределение народов, насильственно удерживаемых Россией, выражающимся в праве угнетенного народа, свободно решать вопрос государственного статуса и самостоятельно осуществлять свое культурное, экономическое развитие. Все эти годы народы Северного Кавказа внимательно наблюдают за борьбой чеченцев за свободу и жаждут международного признания права чеченского народа на свою государственность, чтобы начать уже свою борьбу за независимость и в дальнейшем воссоздать с учетом современных реалий Кавказскую конфедерацию, по примеру конфедерации горских народов 1918 года. Наше правительство в этом году, 11 мая, 105-й годовщине создания Горской Республики, планирует провести учредительную конференцию или собрание с тем, чтобы реанимировать и восстановить это государственное образование. На фоне тех событий, которые сегодня происходят в мире, и исключительно исходя из того, что чем и к чему сегодня готовит форум общественное сознание, общественное мнение и мирового сообщества, и российского сообщества о демонтаже, о необходимости переустройства российского государства, о реформации России в какое-то другое государственное образование, в свете этих событий считаю, что исключительно важным будет вернуться к проекту Горской Республики, которая в свое время была признана десятками стран международного сообщества. Я уверен в том, что именно этот проект найдет поддержку и в Вашингтоне, и в Европейском Союзе. Сегодня вылетел министр иностранных дел Чеченской Республики Ичкерия в Вашингтон именно с этим проектом. И я только что говорил с Анной Фатыго, я представлю вот этот проект нового государственного образования и для Европейского Союза, и в частности нашему другу Анне Фатыго. Спасибо за внимание. Я очень благодарен вам за возможность высказаться здесь, высказать свое мнение здесь, на этом форуме. Спасибо огромное.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. It was extremely important contribution to this conference. Now something for the Mosua. Allow me with great pleasure to present the representative of Poland, the outstanding Polish scholar, historian, specializing in history of diplomacy and totalitarian regimes, Sovietologist as well, Professor Marek Konrad. I'm very sorry because of lack of Polish interpretation during this conference. I invite him only in Polish to take this floor. Please allow me to have this pleasure, short pleasure during this conference. Panie profesorze, bardzo proszę.
Dziękuję. Thank you very much. I would like to limit myself to some general remarks concerning the problem of Russian tradition of imperialism and Soviet imperialism in the 20th century. The remark number one, I think, should be devoted to the imperial character of the revolutionary Russia. The main factor which permitted to establish Russia in the role of a great international power was the dismemberment of Poland in the end of the 18th century. The dismemberment of Polish-Ukrainian Republic of Poland in the other words. The concept of power to which Russia belonged until the Great War, which was started in 1914. Partitions of Poland permitted Russia to enter to the center of Europe, and we can imagine easily the precarious situation of Polish nation, Polish people, after the partitions, when we say that 80% of the pre-partition territories of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was under Russian domination after the Congress of Vienna, when a small Polish kingdom was re-established in the dynastic union with Russia. Let me say that it is highly difficult to imagine the history of the 19th century and the history of the 20th century without mentioning the problem of the partitions of Poland, which cannot be neglected in not only European history, but especially in the Central European geopolitical constellation. The durable consequences of the partitions of Poland are present in contemporary geopolitical situation, because Russia was the benefactor of this situation, of the partitions of Poland, and it became the great power after the collapse of Poland and Russia entered to the center of Europe. Remark number two, in 19th century, we can say that Russian imperialism codified some ideas of the external expansion. I mean, especially the idea of the dismemberment of Turkey, Crimean War, and the Eastern crisis of 1876-78, which was ended by a compromise adopted on the Congress of Berlin. And in the second, especially in the second half of the 19th century, we can not neglect, it is impossible to neglect the second idea of Russian external expansion. I mean the idea of dismemberment of Austria, which was strictly connected with the idea of pan-Slavism. This was one of the principal reasons of the Austro-Russian conflict, which led Europe to the war in 1914. Russian Tsarist foreign policy, of course, was a peaceful policy, so to say, because Russia participated in the European concept, but post-Vienna Russia policy was a policy of gendarme of Europe, especially under Nicholas I. And secondly, we have a visible coexistence of the participation in the European concept of powers with the ideas of external against Turkey and Austria especially. The reflection number 3 in my short overview, we must devote some time to the collapse of the Russian Empire in 1917 and to the political disorder in Eastern Europe after the collapse of the Russian monarchy and the two revolutions in 1917. This disorder is not neglected in historiography of Russia and Europe, was a turning point in European history. However, it appeared finally impossible to reconstruct new, the imperialized Eastern Europe without Russian Empire. This idea belongs to the main conceptions of Marshal Piłsudski, as we know, and he should be mentioned as the architect of the Polish-Ukrainian alliance. We can generally, in some words, say that Piłsudski had two ideas: the idea of federalism with Lithuania and Belarus, and to re-establish Ukrainian state. And Piłsudski's idea of Ukraine was the idea of Ukraine in the role of ally of Poland, the ally of Poland, strategic ally against Russia, of course. The alliance of April 1920 appeared finally unsuccessful, as we know, and Piłsudski's program was given up after the victorious war against Soviet Russia. But this victorious war was ended by the peace of compromise. We can say that peace of compromise, which was adopted in Riga in March 1921. From Polish point of view, the Riga Treaty can be described as a piece of compromise. From Ukrainian point of view, it was a kind of partition of Ukrainian territories between Poland and communist Russia. And from Soviet perspective, it was only an armistice in the time of weakness of Russia. And the peace lasted only to 1939, when it was violated by the Red Army on September 17. Finally, Russia after 1917 was not imperialized, it was rebuilt as an empire. Intensive Sovietization of non-Russian nations inside the Soviet Union in the Stalinist era became the instrument of communist utopia, but also of domination, communist domination of this empire of new type empire. We have generally a discussion in Polish historiography, in Polish Sovietology. Well-known Polish historian Jan Kucharzewski argued that the Russian nation is the factor profiting in the Soviet imperialism and expansionism. The totally different point of view was proposed by no more well-known person in Polish intellectual history, I mean writer Józef Mackiewicz, who argued that Russia is not a typically colonial empire, because the Russian nation is the first victim of totalitarian regime. These are concrete words of Józef Mackiewicz. In reality, and I think that that will be my last reflection due to the limits of time, in reality, Soviet policy under Stalin 30s, in the last decade before the outbreak of the Second World War, was not a peaceful policy. It is true that Soviet diplomacy promoted the idea of collective security, a bloc of Eastern and Central European states against Germany. But it was only a propaganda formula. It was only a theory. In reality, Soviet Union in 1930s wanted to rebuild the domination on Central Europe, on these territories which were lost after the crisis of the Russian empire after the Great War and the geopolitical revolution in Europe, in Central and Eastern Europe in 1920. For Russia, under Stalin, for the Soviet Union under Stalin, there were two possibilities: to achieve the main aim in cooperation with the Western powers. The idea was attempted in 1934 when the French proposal of Eastern Pact was discussed in the diplomatic cabinet of Europe. I mean, the Eastern Pact is a proposal of collective security, which was supported by Litvinov and Commissar Litvinov and Soviet diplomacy. But the other partner was Germany. And finally, Soviet Union achieved the main aim in the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact was not an accident. Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact was some kind of coronation of Soviet Stalinist vision of foreign policy. And last remark, the genocide in the totalitarian Soviet state was the instrument of the totalitarian rule, and especially we cannot omit such problem like the extermination of Polish population in the Soviet Union, 200,000 people in the years 1937-38. Of course, Polish society, Polish people in the Soviet Union were not a unique victim of this cruel dictatorship, but I think it is the obligation of Polish historians not to neglect this factor when we have in the topic of our conference the idea of genocide, which is strictly associated with the totalitarian rule in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was the first totalitarian regime, not Italian fascism and not German Nazis, but Russia really was the inventor of totalitarian regime. Thank you very much for these brief remarks.
Professor Cormack, thank you very much indeed. Now time has come for the Russian angle of this. We welcome to the podium the outstanding Russian speaker, Professor head of Moscow-based Center for Research of Post-Industrial Societies, but frequently a lecturer elsewhere in the United States, prestigious university, lectures as well as in France and other places. He's the author of quite well-known Foresight of Russia post-2030. So, well, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm very grateful for inviting me here. So I will do my best to restore the agenda of our meeting and to turn back to the questions which were posed on the first panel. So it's about the history of the Russian Empire and the Russian imperialism, about the current events, and what ties and what lines can actually help to explain the continuation of the Russian imperialist tradition. I would say that I was very interested in Professor Brian Williams' introduction and his thesis, but I would say, from my point of view, they are a little bit superficial, because the Russian Empire is very much similar to the Western European empires, and it's very much different from it in many obstacles. What is the similarity? The similarity from my point of view is that the Russian imperialism, it was not Russian imperialism actually, it was a Muscovite imperialism. Because Russia didn't exist at the time when Moscow started its imperial expansion. And the imperial expansion of Moscow, started from the late 15th century, was very similar to what happened, what was done by the European powers. Both European powers and Moscow expanded on the west-east line. So the European powers expanded across the Atlantic to both Americas, like the French in Louisiana, the British in certain colonies, the Spanish and the Portuguese in South America, and the Russian went opposite way to the east, conquering Tatar Khanate, Siberian Khanate, and then ending in the Pacific Ocean. This was, as I believe, it was a time of I would say, true colonialism. It was a colonization when the masses of people from the metropolises resettled in these colonies, and actually this was a time of genocide, of terrible genocide, both from the Russian side and both from the European side in Americas. And the result was the new colonial empire, which was inhabited and populated in some significant degree by the representatives of the metropolis. The Russians migrated to Siberia in great numbers, the Englishmen, the French, the Huguenots, the Dutch people, the Germans migrated to North America, the Spaniards and Portuguese to South America, and they actually all built in these territories the societies which were very similar to their own in their homelands. The second part of the colonial process came around 200 years later, when once again, both European imperial powers and Moscow, I would say, Russia, turned southwards. When the Russians invaded Caucasian territories, Central Asia, Crimea, territories which were previously occupied and controlled by Turkey, and the European powers turned south to India, the partition of Africa, Indochina, and all other places. What was very particular in this case, that neither Europeans nor the Russians never made the majority of population in the southern territories. Nor in Rhodesia, nor in India, nor in Tajikistan. The colonial powers never have a huge presence of their own population. It was a kind of military control. And now the second part, what differs the Russian Empire from the European empires? The Russian Empire expanded gradually, while the European empires expanded from time to time. So in the late 18th century and the early 19th century, the European empires, the first European empires collapsed. And the United States of America, the nations like Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Argentina, Mexico, they appeared as independent nations. In Russia, it never happened. Russia made another wave of expansion. When for the Europeans it was a subsequent wave, for Russia it was, another wave, like a much Russian one. So another very big difference is that all the European imperial expansion appeared only after the corresponding European countries became nation states. Spain started its expansion into Americas in early 15th century after the reunification of Spain in 1492. French expansion, overseas expansion, was also following from the creation of French unitary state under the Louis XIII. Then the same with England, this 1582. Never Prussia or Piedmont had the colonial experience because they never, as they became nation state of Italy and Germany, they started this expansion. The Empire of Moscow was very different because Moscow was never a nation state. And the empire it created, which was actually occasionally named Russia, called Russia, since the middle of the 17th century, was also never a nation state. It was an empire in itself. So therefore, the European nations, they were later reduced to their original territory. And this was, of course, a very painful process. But the Europeans, they recreated their identity because they had it before. And Russia has very different situation in this case because when the Russian Empire collapsed in 1991, it was a real tragedy for the people because there are two major points in Russian history. First of all, Russia as Russia appeared when it actually annexed or appropriated, I would not take a much sense of the word, the eastern Ukraine in 1654. Since this time, the titles of the Moscow rulers became the Tsars of Russia, from the great Count of Moscow and the Tsars of Rus. And so, therefore, for Russia, part of Ukraine and Belarus and all these territories, they seem to be an integral part of what was called Russia in ancient times. And therefore, it creates a huge identity problem for the Russians. And it's not only the responsible for the war in Ukraine, I would say, but the Russian people are very much supportive of it. It's a very sad story to say, but I would tell you that it's not only a Kremlin project. It's, in many cases, it's a project of the Russian people who understand its history in this way. And another point is that because Russia never experienced contraction, for example, like England after it lost to the United States, the certain colonies, since Russia never experienced contraction, every kind of loss of the territory is perceived as a national tragedy problem for the Russians. So this makes Russia a very unique, aggressive, and actually hostile empire, which presents and will present for a long time to go a huge existential threat to the European Union. The last point I would make here, because it's not much time, I would say that the Russian Mir idea is, I think, very misleading. Why? Because the Soviet communists, when they tried to re-establish the Russian Empire in a territorial sense in 1917 or afterwards, they actually abandoned the very mention of Russia. It was the Soviet Union. It was not a Russian Union. It was a Soviet Union. They seized the idea of Russiousness for getting back all these republics inside the umbrella of the Soviet Union. Now, the problem is that, and it was like a kind of international idea which can cover all the wars and whatsoever. Now, they try to expand in the name of Russian rule, which is, I would say very contradictory idea. Because if Russia created or declared itself in 1991 a Republic of Moscow, it would be a very different situation, because Moscow is not hostile to Ukraine. It's not hostile to Belarus, it's not hostile to Moldova, because Moscow would be a kind of territorial state which can actually reform itself inside of it. When you say Russia, you immediately think about all the Russians are dispersed all over the post-Soviet region, and this makes you potentially aggressive, what we have seen since 1992. It was not Putin who started the war in Ukraine, it was Yeltsin who started the war in Chechnya, it was Yeltsin who actually started the war in Moldova, and also in Georgia and Abkhazia. So I would say that the Russian state, if it is called Russian state, produces the idea of Russian world, and this continues into a kind of progressive policy. If it is reduced to Moscow, if it can somehow live with this new identity, trying to establish more equal relationship with the peoples and nations inside this Muscovite territory, in this war, with the help of the collective West, and the Russian forces will be expelled from all the occupied territories. But what I do not believe, actually, is that this will lead to the collapse and breakup of Russia. Because, the French colonial empire, the English colonial empire, the Spanish colonial empire, all they collapsed, but not Spain, not United Kingdom, not France. It's not about, the Spain lost Philippines and many other territories, but it hadn't lost Catalonia so far. So therefore, I'm not so sure that there are a lot of prerequisites for the Russian state to collapse and to be split over. But anyway, we are now in fight with very specific empire, and we should very carefully analyze what the kind of empire we are facing. Thank you.
Professor. Now I kindly ask our staff to initiate our first remote connection. Our speaker is Bjorn Safranov, representing the activist representing Lapland Republic from Murmansk.
The opportunity to attend this conference. This is very important for the region and me in particular. Before starting my speech, I have to tell you that I'm not on the territory, now I am on the territory of Russia. And therefore, my words are limited and by the laws of the state. Let's get to the point. Most of the presented needs to be given a little context. My name is Bjorn Safranov. I'm native of Kola Peninsula, and I'm a member of Movement for Freedom. Yeah, they will name it like this. I will have to talk more about present and future than history. I will try to explain my region in terms of geography and geopolitics. Also, besides this, I will try to explain you the special situation with military settlements, which are so common on the north, in the north on the Russian territory, in this unpleasant place to live. Despite the fact that my region has a huge history and amazing past from apparently controlled territory with one of the oldest autonomous people of Europe to a de facto outpost and military colony with a predominantly non-indigenous people, I will not touch on it. You don't need to listen a huge history of a region that currently has less than 1 million people. A lot has already been said about Russian colonialism, as well as genocide and popular displacement. The Kola Peninsula is interesting to others. It's better to start with why you even want to hear about a place like Kola Peninsula. This place is the main naval base of Russian Northern Fleet. It's built on duty and port activities and fishing. This is a very strange place. It's not like Central Russia. These people are so different from the Moscow, Petersburg people, because in case of nature, in case of duty and autochthonous people traditions like Sami people or Pomo people. For example, people from Kola Peninsula try to eat reindeers more often than in Central Russia. But this is one main question about this region is why I am talking about it right now. Because in the Russian-Ukrainian war, or specific military operation like it's called here, we can see that now creates loyalty to the Putin regime from military power. It's important to understand that now the military is not fighting for the country, they are fighting for themselves and for the right monarch. This is very strange thing since the oath of the president is given only by the troops of National Guard, and all other troops gave it to the Constitution of Russian Federation. But since in Russia Constitution is a piece of paper with the sake of with nothing is hidden, no sacred meaning, no legal force, absolutely nothing. This is why if the president is demolished and has no hair, then the troops will fight only for themselves. And a funny situation followed from this. I'm going to have to give honest but unpleasant information from now. We see the policy of military settlement. The northern region of Russia have a large part of the population included in military organization or directly depend on it. Therefore, it's impossible for some regions to consider the option of demilitarization. This will literally force these people to fight to the last breath. Look for opportunities in PMCs like Wagner's School, create new military organization, and also create something like criminal gangs. But if they will get an alternative, if you will say that demilitarization will affect only on the Russians or something like this, these people, after the collapse of the image of Putin, which is already happening, will clearly support our tendencies to freedom. These people will do anything to keep their profession in which they have been for so long. They have no future without military specialty. This is what they studied for and what they receive and where they receive money. Their whole identity is based on what are they. Therefore, this action is extremely important for him. But after receiving freedom, they can serve the whole community. Their craft can be directed to a good deed. They are good sailors. I'm studying in the Murmansk Marine College. I understand this. This is very important part of the Kola Peninsula region. This is extremely important for them. They will, of course, they will understand. Now they are understanding that the main problem of our region is unfortunately rulers from Moscow, because their government just try to stall all their efficiency and to relocate all our resources to Moscow. It's not like regular Siberian resources like oil or coal. It's more important, it's people population. Modern Moscow colonialism is about to replace a lot of people from their origin, from their original place for living, and trying to make the Muscovites through the very strange process of living in central Russian city. This is absolutely different from any part of Russia. It's more like huge, extremely huge city-state with all Russian territory under colonial government. Because not a lot of you know, but in Russia we cannot elect our government. We cannot elect anyone. That's and only one true election is usually in Moscow. That's why I should say the modern Russian colonialism is the big threat for all people from the Russia. You know a lot of migrants in Moscow, like from Caucasian region, from northern parts. All they are trying to do their best for getting better lives, but in the time they will corrupt under this strange empire. Sorry. I would also like to say about the problem of the extinction of autonomous people. I'm Karel, who lived in the Sami village. I know a lot about the basic of the extinction of entire ethnic groups, how it goes. To perceive ethnic groups, it is necessary to preserve the traditional way of life. We have example of other countries in Scandinavia where the Sami population is only growing and it's already reaching at least some serious number, like in Lapland, under Finnish or Sweden or Norwegian control. We see there's 20, 30, 40,000 of people, but in Russia we see a decline, extinction of the Sami. Sami art is marginalized. It's like the Stone Age work. Interesting. There is just no respect for any other culture than the modern Muscovite culture. It's not even Russian culture. It's just modernistic simulacre of culture. they try to give to all people, all ethnics in Russia. This is some monstrous kind of nationalism. It's not like about original Russian or Slavic people, it's only about this simulacre that Moscow creates. Thank you for letting me say that. That was very important for me, for telling you that things. Especially thank you for Mr. William. He saved a lot of times for everyone here to explaining how actually Russian colonialism worked.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Safran. There is huge applause. It was important for all of us. Thank you. Now I'd like to give the floor to Anvar Kurmanakayev, representing the Nogay Republic, member of the National Political Center, Nogay National Political Center, and the political activities. The floor is yours.
Здравствуйте, дамы и господа. Я представитель Ногайского движения, Закаев Ахмед Закаевич. Сегодня я хочу представить, много сказали о геноциде. Я тоже хочу на 100 лет вернуться о геноциде. Перед черкесским народом у нас на 100 лет был геноцид ногайского народа. Екатериной II. Это так. 1783 год. 1 октября. Геноцид ногайского народа. Было 1 200 000 населения малой Ногайской Орды, которые сегодня знают как Крымское ханство. И от степей Кавказа и до степей Буджака и Крыма было уничтожено самое мало 500 000 населения Ногайского народа. Но это скрывается так, да? И выселено все остальное население. Остались маленькие куски на наших бывших территориях, маленькими. И вот в любой территории мы остались малыми народами, да? Ничего не решающими вообще, если так разобраться. Нас взяли еще, мало того, что нас мало, сегодня 100 000, еще разделили на мелкие куски и отдали в разные территории, чтобы вообще нас не слышно было. Это вот первое, вот, что мы потеряли, это Астраханское ханство, это была столица Ногайской Орды. На сегодняшний день она 500 лет уже оккупированная. Сегодня 200 000 ногайского населения коренного. В основе этих народа этого коренного создать Ногайскую республику Астрахань. Наконец вот освободиться от этого, и, как говорится, гнета и нищеты. На территории, например, Астраханской области добывается и нефть, и газ в огромных количествах. Местному населению ничего не дается. Вообще, абсолютно. Все вывозится в Москву. Местное население перебивается, я не знаю. Они ездят, везде ищут работу и так далее. Это уже сегодняшний геноцид. Плюс еще наш народ на 100 000. В первом этом, как вот взяли, послали на войну против Украины. 5 000 сразу. Молодежи забрали. 5 000 молодежи, это на 100 000 населения, это опять же геноцид. Поэтому я хочу вот, прекратить вот этот геноцид сколько можно. Пора уже с этой империей, наверное, разобраться, да, поделить ее, отдать коренным народам свои земли, чтобы они каждый сам управлял своей своей судьбой, был свободен. Только свободные нации что-то могут создавать. А такие вот империи, они ничего еще не создали. Даже возьмем Пушкина, Лермонтова, они все переписали коренных народов, все эти, почитайте, поэмы, все эпосы, все переписано на русский язык, выдано как русская поэзия и так далее. Они ничего не создали. Поэтому это народ такой, как в рабстве живет, она не может создать. Только свободные народы могут создать. Если вы хотите, чтобы наш мир создавался как бы в лучшем виде, чтобы он прогрессировал, чтобы у нас был, как говорится, рост экономики, улучшение всего, как бы, всех народов, да, жизни и так далее, то надо освободить народы, дать им возможность развиваться. Вот. Только так мы сможем построить мирное существование, да, в мире вообще и как. Примерно так. Вот сегодня я хотел бы обратиться ко всему миру, чтобы признали ногайский геноцид 1783 года, 1 октября. Мы каждый год справляем этот геноцид, поминаем своих погибших. Вот. Там сколько было убито, если вы даже это все зафиксировано в истории, все можете почитать в открытом доступе. Я просто, я не знаю, если я сейчас начну зачитывать, это вообще ужас, что творили русские солдаты на нашей территории. Они брали, даже вот они смеются, да, над этим, брали маленьких новорожденных детей, да, об стену головой ударяли, да, и смеялись над этим, как они, как спелый арбуз лопается у ребенка голова, да. Это вообще ужас, что творят. Они, вот, чтобы этого никогда не повторилось, чтобы ни один народ этого не видел никогда. Поэтому я хочу вот сказать.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for this contribution. Next, two speakers. Unfortunately, we have very limited time, so I kindly ask you to introduce yourself at the beginning of your presentation and try to be very brief, my kind request. Mr. Stanisław Susłow first.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, thank you for the chance to speak on important questions. The Russian war is a concept that has recently taken an environmental importance. The reason is the brutal aggression of the so-called Russian Federation on independent Ukraine. The Russian war today has a similar ideology to fascism, of one national superiority over others. It was the fascist ideology of the Russian war that drove the direct military aggression against Ukraine. In the same way, the Russian war is inside in the so-called Russian Federation. Moscow ignores the drunkenness, drug use, and aggressive insert the native peoples on the occupation territories. Moscow ignores the terrible HIV epidemic that is killing the population of the so-called Russian Federation. The United Nations classifies this as a genocide. Genocide is beginning carried out both outside the borders of the so-called Russian Federation and inside it. The Russian war is irrational and like a parasite, it will be die in the end. At present, the only ambition of the Russian world is to keep alive all the war criminal leader Putin and his friends. The growing agony we are already seeing in the Russian world will end in disintegration. I would like, therefore, to draw the attention of the European Parliament to two important questions that we have discussed in previous forums, and also important message which I will say at the end of my speech. The first was the question of security, the security of nuclear weapons, of nuclear objects, and public safety in the creation of the new independent countries in the post-Russian space. Optionally, They could be done by using elites in power structures in the regions to provide order and security at the start of the formation of independent countries. What guarantees can the elites get for this? The second question is developing a handout of passports from the new independent countries as soon as possible. The question of security. In our previous forums, we have discussed the constancy of the current regional borders. The solution will provide security from regional conflicts on a territorial basis. To secure nuclear objects and weapons, as well as public order, it is proposed to temporarily use existing elites in the initial time. A few words about the elites in the so-called Russian Federation. All the elites in the regions are installed from Moscow. But that doesn't mean that they are ideologically committed to the Russian vote. The rhetoric of their speeches is not an idea but a job for money. Mind you, I'm talking about the elites in the regions, where they see the phrase of the center, they will look out options to keep their money and secure it for themselves. They will gladly sell out their bosses if they understand that they can keep their money and their lives. One thing to offer now is to inform the elites that they have the only chance to keep in their money and get an amnesty from the tribunal. But to do so, they want to provide control of the military and police in the regions, and they want to provide security for nuclear objects and weapons, as well as public order. And they want to agree that they will not be able to take part in the future government elections and structures. They must start preparing for the democratic elections in the region and start cooperation with the temporary international control. Temporary international control will work as advisor to the organization of democratic procedures and nuclear dismantling. Question number 2. There is already a worldwide practice to using passports of some countries to citizens of other countries, dual citizenship and more. The use of such passport could begin after the adoption of a declaration of regional sovereignty. It will be good if the sovereignty of the new countries is the first accepted by the countries that have borders with the so-called Russian Federation. Having a Siberian Confederation of free status and passport will allow holders of this passport to participate in the referendums and elections. This is very important for the process I'm talking about with the first point. For the first time, passports can be handed out outside the territory of the so-called Russian Federation. I would like to point out that this is not of a country that will be liberated from the Moscow-centered occupation. I would like to say that both questions are very important, and it is impossible to talk about all the details in a small period of time. This question needs to be detailed with the analytics expert and the working groups with the European Union and maybe other international bodies. Resolution of this important question will help to protect everyone from the aggressive Russian war as quickly as possible. When the aggressive Russian war ends, the following world problems will disappear. First, the global source of military danger. 2, the dirty money planning center. 3, a major center of global corruption. 4, center of propaganda against democracy and progress. 5, the problems of Balkans region and resolution of possible questions. 6, dictatorships of Iran and North Korea will disappear. 7, military conflicts in Africa territory will stop. If we don't stop it now, the aggressive empire will rise again from the dark. War, the one we see now after the collapse of the USSR. But it is not only the regions of Russia that are occupied by the so-called Russian Federation. My colleague Emir Stoikovich will talk about in next panel for today. And dear colleagues, you can find the full text of my speech in the promotional materials in our time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. Apologies for a short time of contribution. The last speaker of this panel is Artyom Tarasov. Please introduce yourself at the very beginning of the presentation.
Dear participants, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm Artyom Tarasov. I am legal researcher and humanitarian worker with refugees, and I'm glad to welcome supporters of independence of different lands and nations. I'm glad to see free people here, and I'm also glad to see representatives of European states, politicians and public figures. I want to welcome you and thank you for being here and for communicating with us. I represent the supporters of the independence of the Pskov land. For us, the subject of our event, and in particular the first panel, is very, very relevant. Major historical events are taking place before our very eyes. The Russian Empire is waging another war of aggression, and the victorious country and its allies will decide what they want Russian territory to be. And now I want to address European politicians. Many people tell you that you should be afraid of the so-called collapse of Russia. They tell you that it is possible, and even if it is possible, it must be prevented. Those who say that are wishing you and your country's harm. They want a monster living near your eastern border that they will put to sleep for a while, but that sleep will not last forever. This monster used to extend as far as East Germany. Now almost all of the Eastern European states are free. Had that made it worse? Has there been a collapse? So why should it happen now, where the new post-Russian states join the European family? The problem is that the Russian system, the imperial ideology, persists for all of Russia's internal transformations. Changing the flag over the Kremlin will not fundamentally change the essence of Russian statehood. So the catastrophic position of the Pskov, of Tsars and regimes, because the empire does not care about the invaded territories. It is just a senseless conquest. This did not even begin with Ivan the Terrible, but earlier, when the Moscow princes began making plans to enslave their neighbors. No one talks about it, but at the time our land, I mean the Pskov Republic, had borders and army laws, and it was a separate state. It was a completely different system from Moscow. And we were some of Russia's first victims. And as we can see, Russia has not stopped to this day, continuing the conquest for over 500 years. And it does not mean that we are suggesting a return to the past, but we have to build a future and stop imperialism. We are not just thinking of ourselves, we are thinking of Europe and of the world. Solving this problem will require great effort, but victory in this struggle will be beneficial to all of Eastern Europe and Europe in common. Pskov is a region that is on the border with Latvia, Estonia and Belarus. Therefore, it is important to say, especially to the representatives of these states, we have recently issued a statement in which we pointed out that the Pskov Republic must become free with the Russian past forever and go to the west, to its origins, to its European brothers, with whom it was separated, having been kidnapped from the European family and given into the Moscow captivity. Estonians, Latvians, Belarusians, Lithuanians and other peoples and nations, we want to live with you with friendship and cooperation. Our peoples have lived side by side for centuries, trading and cooperating with each other. We have many mixed marriages where there are Pskov people, Estonians, Latvians, Belarusians, and so on. We are connected by a common geographic region, historical and cultural ties. And we are convinced that our aspirations are useful and beneficial for you too. Freeing a neighboring region from an imperial mindset is a difficult task. That is why we need cooperation with our neighbors. For our part, we call on the countries of Eastern Europe in particular to join the discussion on political autonomy of the Pskov land and other lands of Northwest Russia. We are convinced that contact with European partners on this issue should be led by people who do not associate themselves with Russia and who are ready to take responsibility for creating a secure and strong Baltic region. We are convinced that it is better to develop our land together, no empire, no Russian bases, no treaties. Our independence will benefit the whole Baltic region as well as the whole Europe. Together we will strengthen our Baltic Sea region. It will expand eastwards, and the problem of the imperial threat will be solved forever. So the question of the independence of the Pskov Republic and other border regions is not about possible or not possible. It is about necessary. It is necessary for Pskov itself and necessary for its neighbors. And know that we will do our best for it. Thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, us all join in applauding all distinguished speakers. I consider this panel particularly interesting. Thank you very much indeed. We have to quickly rearrange the podium, so please stay. It will take just a couple of minutes. My colleague Kosma Zlotowski takes moderating of this panel, and I invite next panelists.
Давай, да, конечно. Только на что? Нет, давай, почему, давай. Только надо тогда, сейчас,
Надо с Олегом сделать.
ну, давай, снимем. Да.
Не видели
Кого?
целлофановый мешочек?
Я вам
А
под
он
стол
там возле
подложил.
кресла,
Под
чтобы
стол
не...
подложил.
Вас
я
снимают, чтобы не
потерял?
было.
Не, это я
Я
положил
так
под стол.
переволновался, прям не нужно.
Вы
Под
лучше
стол.
всех выступили, супер.
Второй подарок, который будет. Мы идемся на обед. Смотрите меня, я всех буду заводить на обед. Хорошо?
Под стулом. У вас, где вы сидите, там под стулом.
Сейчас начинается.
Там Пономарев на лестнице стоит и всем дает интервью подряд. Одним словом, я думаю, что... На что только? Давай, может быть,
А можно у вас спросить? Можно у вас спросить? Вот я на русском говорил, они понимают?
Нет, переводчики, вот видите, все. Это все переводчики и делают синхронный перевод. И им заранее тексты были отправлены, поэтому они в курсе, в контексте, они заранее подготовились и все четко перевели.
Я беспокоился, думаю, понимают, не понимают.
Не-не-не, все отлично. Just one second, 1 second.
Так, если ты хочешь писать... сессию интервью. Значит, просто так, то, что снял я.
We have rather time shortage, so we should slowly begin the next panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We should begin our panel. There is rather time shortage, so we should begin. Well, so let's start. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Druzья. I am a member of the European Parliament and co-worker of Mrs. Anna Fotyga, who has organized this conference, and a member of ECR group in the European Parliament. Well, we have a war. And the war that Russia has declared on Ukraine and the entire democratic world has tragic consequences for all of us, but including its residents. Of course, certain privileged groups are able to avoid participating in the fighting and enjoy relative normalcy. But for hundreds of thousands of citizens of the Russian Federation, it is a brutal reality sweetened by propaganda only. Can this conflict lead to the disintegration of the relic of colonialism that Russia is? What price are ethnic minorities and regions far from Moscow and St. Petersburg paying for the war? The answer, I hope, we will get from our guest, to whom I am giving the floor. Please, dear panelists, introduce yourself shortly, and I hope it will be a fruitful discussion. Our first panelist is Mr. Andrius Almanis. You have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. I'd like first of all thank organizers of this meeting for inviting me here, and let's thank you all being here. I am president of the Institute of Polish-Russia Regions and a member of a committee of Independent Siberia Confederation. And I will tell you about four options. Switch, okay. Four options of Polish-Russia, but all of them are with the same result. Independent new states. No other result. First option, the best option. It is the shortest way with least loss is maximum support from the democratic world for the regions and the new states. In this case, Russia's military defeat will be followed by the guaranteed collapse of the current Kremlin regime, then followed by the guaranteed strengthening of centrifugal forces. The regions or some regions will become independent states. The regions or some regions, and best case scenario, the new states will have sufficient support from the democratic world. After this, stability and democracy will prevail in this region of the world. Option 2. Not sufficient support. Sadly, it's a quite realistic scenario, but hope we will go with first scenario. That's why, because I'm talking about it. The new states will not get sufficient support in this case from the democratic world. Most of new states, if chosen, will become again authoritarian, and as a result, reanimation of the empire is guaranteed. Then again, concentration of forces will take place, and again, new wars. Then the whole democratic world will mobilize at last, because it will once again face an existential threat. Again, there will be the military defeat of Russia, then again the collapse of the Kremlin regime, and again the guaranteed strengthening of centrifugal forces. Regions or some regions again will become independent states, and finally the democratic world will return back to the real power of democracy and decide to give finally sufficient support to the new states. You see, same result, but in place of one circle, we are doing 2 circles or maybe more, with much more victims. Option 3, survival. Oh. Yeah. Option 3, survival. Then again concentration and forces, and again new wars. And then finally military defeat of Russia. Then again collapse of the Kremlin regime, strengthening of centrifugal forces, and we are going the same result. Establishing of new states, and finally stability and democracy will prevail in this world region. But what price? Option 4. Option of united democratic Russia. Democratic or rather semi or even pseudo-democratic Russia. Perhaps this is even the most dangerous option, because in this case the wish to support the democratic regime of a new united Russia will guarantee lead back to the renovation of the empire and again to the new wars. Why? Simple. After the military defeat of Russia, there will be collapse of the Kremlin regime, then will appear a united semi-democratic Russia, and after that, guaranteed fall back to the empire and back to the new world. You will say, this renovation of empire does not have to happen, but do you remember what was the end of Yeltsin's Russia? Does the world want to repeat same mistakes again and again? So, in order to avoid same circle and guarantee new wars and a huge number of victims, the democratic world must prepare right now for the guaranteed collapse of the current Russian regime and the establishment of new states. And democratic world must right now support independent democratic organizations and movements in the regions of present-day Russia. After the guaranteed crash of the current Russian regime, one. Okay. direct relations with the regions, especially the democratic. 2, plan for the democratization of regions. 3, very important, support and in exchange for democratization. Of course, the reparation plans, constant control over those plans, democratization plan, ideas for each region, and investment plans and programs for each region. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manis. And now we have a voice from Moscow Republic, remotely, Mr. Ilya Lazarenko.
Рад всех слышать. Господа, поскольку тема этой панели является влияние российского вторжения в Украину на позицию внутреннюю жизнь российских регионов, я скажу несколько слов об этом для начала. Дело в том, что война против Украины и российское вторжение в Украину привело к двум интересным тенденциям, которые, к сожалению, хоть и взаимопротиворечивы, но тем не менее, к счастью, составляют интересную комбинацию. Во-первых, мы видим, что у значительной части населения это вторжение вызывает активную поддержку и вызывает вовлечение в историю, поскольку для огромного количества граждан Ирака эта война является битвой за Россию. То есть делаются ставки, и российская пропаганда об этом прямо говорит, ставки на окончательную победу или окончательное поражение. Это очень важный психологический феномен, поскольку он ведет к тому, что поражение России в этой войне окажет чудовищное политическое, психологическое, моральное влияние на граждан России. Другая встречная тенденция – это отчуждение от государства, когда война воспринимается как нечто абсолютно постороннее, и не только в том смысле, что ее ведет какое-то непонятное правительство, но и в том смысле, что все. Обе эти тенденции являются своего рода вовлечением в историю, что для нас сейчас очень важно. В какой-то момент, когда произойдет поражение, военный разгром Российской Федерации, это вовлечение в историю вспыхнет с двух сторон. С одной стороны, вспыхнут разочарованные патриоты России, для которых будет в основном понятно, что история этой России кончилась на этом, как мы внушали все эти годы. С другой стороны, движение в регионах из абстрактного отчуждения от государства перейдет в его политическое отрицание и борьбу за независимость, отказ от подчинения абсолютно провалившемуся в своей политике имперскому центру. Таким образом, обе эти тенденции играют, конечно же, на руку созданию и конструированию будущего построссийского пространства и построссийских государств. При этом парадоксальным образом война против Украины создает эффект обособления этноса метрополии, как мы это часто называем, то есть, собственно, тех, кто считает себя русским. Поскольку война выявляет все больше отстраненность от украинцев и Украины, от окружающего мира в целом. И именно поэтому, парадоксально, как я уже сказал, образом, этнос метрополии начинает осознавать себя как нечто отдельное. И хотя российские идеологи и лично президент Путин утверждают, что у России нет границ, как у любой континентальной идеократической империи, тем не менее оказывается, что границы эти есть. И через некоторое время окажется, что границы эти есть не только вовне Российской Федерации, у нее есть предел роста, оказывается, но и внутри существуют границы, которые отделяют другие народы. Потому что через некоторое время станет полностью очевидно, что, например, татары, они являются отдельным народом, ничуть не менее отдельным, чем украинцы, как и многие другие все народы современной Российской Федерации. Именно этот процесс обособления великороссов русских, или, если говорить более обобщенно этноса метрополии, именно это обособление и приведет к пониманию необходимости создания в так называемой Центральной России государства-убежища для бывшего этноса метрополии. После демонтажа империи, после ее крушения, создание такого государства будет абсолютно необходимым, будет осознаваться и массами, и элитами. Ну, в той степени, в какой они сохранятся вообще после краха империи. Теперь я хотел бы прокомментировать предыдущее выступление и должен заметить, что никаких вариантов, разумеется, прекрасной России будущего, свободной демократической России не существует. Естественно, что Россия сама по себе, по своей сути, является континентальной теократической империей, и никакой перестройки уже не подлежит в этом смысле. Российская политическая культура, российская государственная культура является жесткой имперской, является евразийской, и естественно, что она не может стать единым, даже федеративным, но демократическим и свободным государством. Благодарю за внимание.
Большое вам спасибо. And our next speaker comes from Kuban, Mr. Evgenios Bursanin. You have the floor.
Good afternoon for everyone, ladies and gentlemen, delegates and deputies of Europarlament. I brought a message from the part of Europe which is occupied by Russia for more than 100 years, because the forming of Kuban People's Republic, Kubanskая Народная Республика, formed at 28th of January 1980, and after 2 years of existence it was occupied by Russia. So let us bring us to a topic. So our land is ancient, and a lot of peoples like the ancient Greeks, Romans, and else, and for sure the predecessors of our days circumstance, which is the local population, left a mark at Cuban. Also, the development of this territory in European style and European way continued at medieval times, at Middle Ages, and it was the dynamical growth of trading because of connections, for example, between Circassians and Ottoman Empire, also Byzantines, Genoese, and other peoples passed over this territory. So, as well, the first presence of Ukrainians in predecessors of Ukrainians in Kuban marked at 11th and 12th century, when the Principality of Tmutarakan emerged at southeast of modern Kuban, or modern Krasnodarский Krai, which a lot of people know it in Europe. So as well, the next the next emergence of Ukrainians in the territory of Kuban marked at after 1775, after the devastation and deportation the Cossacks from Zaporizhia siege, and the first settlement of Cossacks, it was about 47 settlements named Stanitsa, formed at 1792, 1794, giving birth to Cuban-Ukrainian mentality and culture, and given to the region the character of part of Ukrainian cultural space, first time after Tmutarakan Principality. So in 19th century Ukrainian culture with local Cuban flavor was the dominant in Cuba, although it did not prevent Russian authorities from exerting constant pressure, especially on Ukrainian language, Ukrainian mentality, Ukrainian traditions, Ukrainian literature, and else. Because it was told enough about the terrible crime of Russian Empire, that's a Kazakh genocide. I just want to add that only at the last stage of this genocide, from 500,000 up to 1 million people were killed at 1,864 and deported. The survivors were deported, to Ottoman Empire. The next genocide, which was played out as a great drama in the territory of Kuban, was the genocide of Cossacks and another groups of Cuban Ukrainians also, and another peoples which populated Kuban were suffered during the period of 20s and 30s of the past century. So as well, the chance for freedom became at 1980 when Cuban People's Republic, Начало, Народная Республика, was formed, and I thanks from all the bottom of my heart, Mr. Ахмед Закаев, for mentioning the Gorskая Республика, because it was the first state that recognized Cuban People's Republic, and it was the first state of which the connections and conversation and diplomatical attitudes were established between Gorskая Республика and Kubanskая Народная Республика. Also, after 2 years of struggle, Cuba was reoccupied. Also, there was an idea, which I want to mention too, to make a kind of federation or confederation of Ukraine, and I want to mention that at least at the part of people who support the restore of especially after the fall of Cuban People's Republic, began the genocide. Also, the Holodomor. I can mention also that the reoccupation of Kuban was done in a very terrible way, as Russia does, as Russia acts usually. And for example, after the delegation in Sevres peace conference, which finished the World War I, the delegates were caught by the imperialists in Kuban, in head of Alexei Kolobukhov, and they were hanged in Kuban. Also, during the negotiations in Rostov-on-Don at 14th of June 1919, one of the heads of independence Kuban and one of the main ideologists, Nikolai Rebovil, was killed mainly at the back. He was shot at the back during the negotiations. So one more crime. As well, there was also the great opposition. For example, it's honorable to mention the Popa, Kozacka Povstanska Armia, which was acting at the region up to 1952. Then after this part of Cuban struggle for independence and for freedom, the new tendencies grew up and began after 2014. So it doesn't mean that it was forgotten, because Cuba all the time had a very big part of self-determination. For example, one of the governors of Cuba, Nikolai Kondratenko, or Batka Kondrat, how we call him, maintained diplomatic relations with Ичкерия and personally with Aslan Maskhadov, the president of Ичкерия. and a representational office of Ичкерия was opened in Krasnodar. Also, he opposed the Russian claim on Tuzla at 90s, and at 2005 opposed the Russian trade sanctions against Moldova. So the year 2040 changed many things, and remember their Ukrainian roots, many locals turned to ideas of independence. In 2014, Krasnodar, the authorities practically cut it at the birth the march for the federalization of Kuban. At 2015, Mikhail Kalamin, architect from Sochi, organized the movement Free Kuban, and in 2019, in Cuban diaspora, in exile, Malinovic Klim, our organization was created by me and Dmitro Dorovskih. So as well, I can mention that the fate of architecture Mikhail Kalamin was tragically, because at August of 2020, after 6 months of persecution by Russian security services, including the use of punitive psychiatry, the activist heart failed. Thus, in our struggle for independence, we have suffered some really losses. As well, the crime of war against Ukraine is the most terrible crime, but not the only crime from Russia. So the meaning is the same. Like as about 100 years before, Ukrainians from Kuban are killing Ukrainians from big Ukraine. And it's the terrible fact. It's really the terrible fact. So not everyone from them is so poisoned with Russian propaganda that they forgot their roots. We know a lot of people who fight in Ukrainian ranks against the Russian aggression, who came from the third countries to Ukraine and joining the forces. Remember about their roots and have a great level of Russification, but anyway, this process with the good terms can have a way back. Anyway, for sure, the defeat of Russian forces in this aggressive war will influence not only defeat but the collapse of the empire, and that's why the first thing we met here I used to remind one more time, and I fixed it in my text here. Firstly, in the moment that Ukrainian soldiers are dying on the war, France defending our calmness, and Russian bombs and missiles are killing civilians, women, children, and the elderly. Therefore, whatever we do here, first of all, remember that to defeat Moscow on the battlefield, we need two components. New, even tougher sanctions against Russia, complete isolation of Russia as a country, forcing the aggression out of the old world markets. The second component is the better investment in the works, in the peace tomorrow, for tomorrow's peace. More high precision, powerful, modern weapons for Ukraine every day. More weapons for Ukraine, more support for Ukraine, stand with Ukraine. This is the main thing, because this war, for sure, will make closer the empire's collapse. As well, in Europe we know the opinion is popular that the collapse of Russia can also give an impulse for any dangerous processes all over the Eurasia. But the aggressive attack of Russia proves another thing, that the Russia is more dangerous and provides more threats for all countries around and for all civilized world in the form of empire. This was how the things were, and this is how the things are. Nevertheless, as well, and as the parts of the things that I want to add about the activities of Malinovi Clean, for sure we provide help for Ukraine, for sure we provide information about our existence, catching this time the activists at the place, I mean at Kuban. We are fixing our contacts with the activists' rights in the territory of Krasnodar Krai, of Kuban, and as well I want to add that another thing that I want to add about this is another decision for Krasnodar Krai. So we think that in view of the historical and cultural ties, and bearing in mind the attempt to create a confederation of Kuban and Ukraine at 1919, we also see not only acceptable but one of the best options, the possible joining Ukraine on a federal or confederal basis. Time will tell which route is the best, independence or become the part of Ukraine. I think that for Kuban it's one of the good and very possible ways. As well, the existence of Kuban, of modern Krasnodar Krai, as part of Ukraine or as independent state, will give a situation of win-win for all the sides of world, of Western world. Our region is very rich. It's marked by wealth of resources and enormous potential for development. Kuban covers 3 climatic zones: temperate, continental, semi-dry, Mediterranean and subtropical, and the range of crops that can be grown in the region are very wide, and its agricultural potential is unique. The region is rich in resources that can be grown in the region and full of the resources. There are about 150 oil and gas producers, and in 2020 new oil fields were discovered near Slavansk on Kuban, the potential of which has not yet been fully explored, possibly some of the largest in Europe. The ports of Azov and Black Seas, Primorsk, Akhtarsk, Taman, Anapa, Novorossiysk, Tuapse, and my mother city Sochi have enormous potential for trading and tourism. And the tourism, thanks to the climate, unique nature and rich history, is also one of the most important sources of income. So we have a great potential to become, or the part of Ukraine, either a great, free, democratic, independent state. Also, I want to finish my words, my message, with the words I mentioned before in other sessions of the forum, that we don't see Kuban as the mono-ethnic entity. We want to base our entity of coexistence with Circassians, Cossacks, and another peoples that populate our land now. Thank you very much, everyone, for this platform. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And stand with Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brusanidis. Both ways you have shown us are welcomed here. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Andrei Sidelnikov. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank all the organizers who invited me to such necessary and timely conference. I'm a political immigrant. I've been living outside outside of Russia for more than 15 years, but I'm still involved to all the problems and life in Russia. I'm Russian, and I think I will continue my speech in Russian. Я являюсь также представителем съезда народных депутатов России, член исполнительного совета и глава секретариата. Полномасштабное вторжение в Украину 24 февраля прошлого года запустило, на мой взгляд, необратимый процесс распада Российской империи. Мне, например, совершенно очевидно, что после победы доблестного народа Украины вместе со всеми союзниками, Россия в том виде, в котором мы привыкли все ее видеть, перестанет существовать, во всяком случае, в границах 91 года. Это совершенно для меня очевидно. Ну не потому, что мне так хочется или кому-то другому так хочется. Эти процессы все запустил и развивает диктатор и узурпатор Владимир Путин на протяжении всего срока своего правления, а это уже больше 23 лет. Предпосылок для распада России достаточно много. Их, наверное, в общем-то, мы все знаем. Это и отсутствие прав и свобод, отсутствие каких-либо демократических институтов, это не справедливое распределение финансовых средств между регионами. Ну, я уже вообще молчу про то, что полностью выкатана площадка политическая, и никакого политического плюрализма, никаких политических партий, политических активностей в России в последние годы просто не наблюдается. Все это картинка, все это придуманные зазеркалья, и никакого отношения к реальности, конечно, это не имеет. Тем более на сегодняшний день мы все прекрасно понимаем, что Россия не может являться членом большой цивилизованной семьи. Но главная причина в том, что грядет распад России, на мой взгляд, это вот начало действительно полномасштабного вторжения. Хотя война началась в 2014 году с аннексии Крыма, войны на Донбассе, до этого война в Грузии, а до этого поход с войной на Чечню, который сегодня показывает, ну, наверное, пример для остальных народов России, которые борются за независимость. Все-таки достаточно долгий путь, и большая заслуга в этом, конечно же, Ахмеда Закаева, который сегодня присутствует на конференции. И, в общем-то, те силы, которые народ Ичкерии проводит за свободу, вот на них нужно, мне кажется, ориентироваться остальным народам, которые хотят быть независимыми от этой имперской российской истории. И сегодня, на мой взгляд, достаточно лучший, наверное, исторический момент, когда народы России действительно могут обрести независимость. Но нужно здесь тоже понимать, что независимость – это и большая ответственность. Можем ли мы справиться с полной жизнедеятельностью, полной свободой в сегодняшнем мире? Тем более, если тот или иной народ находится, грубо говоря, в окружении другой территории, которая не захочет отделиться от России. На сегодняшний день это достаточно много вопросов, на которые мы вряд ли отдадим ответ. Но при всем при этом борьба за независимость, на мой взгляд, это дело правое, и те народы и нации, которые на сегодняшний день порабощены в России, отстоять свою независимость, это действительно путь к будущему цивилизованному существованию и, во всяком случае, свободе. С мая прошлого года я переехал в Киев. Я много бываю в прифронтовой линии и занимаюсь помощью жителям деоккупированных территорий. Сегодня, если у нас с вами есть какие-либо разногласия на видение будущего России, мне кажется, эти разногласия нужно оставить и сделать все возможное для того, чтобы Украина победила, и украинский народ, украинская нация освободила, естественно, с помощью союзников, освободила от фашизма, который пришел, к сожалению, через 100 лет в виде вот этой путинской агрессии. Нам всем необходимо сделать как можно больше для того, чтобы победила Украина, а это означает, что победят все народы, которые на сегодняшний день живут и в России. Это победит и цивилизованный мир, и, во всяком случае, на мой взгляд, будущее всех нас зависит именно от победы Украины. Так что я призываю каждого из находящихся сегодня в зале как можно максимум усилий потратить именно для помощи и украинскому народу, и украинской армии, и помощи нам всем вместе взятым. Спасибо.
Большое вам спасибо. Мы все думаем, что Украина победит. And now I want to give the floor to Mr. Pavel Messerin from Ичкерия.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Pavel Messerin from St. Petersburg. I think you know about St. Petersburg city. I'm coordinator of civil movement Free India, and I will speak about St. Petersburg in post-Russia, or maybe St. Petersburg after Russia. So, ladies and gentlemen, our European colleagues, Russia, the last empire on earth, has completed, exhausted its historical potential. Gone are the British, French, German, Ottoman, and all the other empires. Only Russia remains an empire, a prison of colonized people and region. The age of empires ended in the last century. Can bring the people. We, representatives of the people and regions of Russia, have come to you to tell you something that you may not know. Russia is not a single monolithic country, as its communist leaders and today Vladimir Putin have always tried to imagine. All regions of Russia are very different. They have different history, different culture, different language and dialects. And I'm not just talking about regions with ethnically different population. I'm also talking about the regions where Russians live. Russians in Kaliningrad, in St. Petersburg, in Moscow, Kuban, and Siberia are all very different Russians. And they all want freedom. And they all deserve freedom. Russians do not need the Russian Empire. Please help Russians create their new independent Russian states. I have come to Brussels to tell you about the hope for a free future for the people of magnificent St. Petersburg, the capital of the Ingermanland region, Ичкерия, which now bears the ridiculous communist name of Leningrad Oblast. The level of support from the residents of St. Petersburg and Leningrad region for the idea of self-sufficiency and independence from Moscow was always high. This includes both Soviet and post-Soviet period of the regional history. April 25 in 1993, along with the all-Russian referendum, population survey was conducted about the promotion of St. Petersburg status to the level of a republic within the Russian Federation. 75% of citizens voted for. Initially, a full-scale referendum was planned instead of a survey, yet it turned impossible for legal reasons. According to Russian law, its use of such a level already at that time were not allowed to be put to a referendum by the decision of local authorities. The current political processes in St. Petersburg region of the Russian Federation are very reminiscent of a similar procession in the Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. On the eve of the First World War and the collapse of the Russian Empire were barely noticeable outside people's organization and movements for 3 decades were setting the stage for obtaining national independence in the our age. The political history of Ичкерия or Ingermanland goes back centuries to the days of the reign in Novgorod of the future Kiev Ukrainian Prince Yaroslav the Wise. The region received its name in honor of Yaroslav's wife, the Swedish Princess Ingrid. This period was the time of the first economic prosperity of the region through transit trade between Novgorod Republic and Sweden. In the following centuries, Ingrid was part of the Republic of Novgorod, Moscow, Sweden. As a result of the Northern War, it became part of Russia. At the location of Ingrid capital, the city of Minshans, that was destroyed by war, Tsar Peter the Great founded St. Petersburg, which, before becoming the capital of the Russian Empire, became the center of Ingermanland province, which was later remained into St. Petersburg. During the Civil War, on the territory of modern Leningrad region to the north of St. Petersburg, the independent Republic North Ingria was formed, which fought against the Bolshevik Russia. A nobleman and a white officer, Georgy Elvengren, was the head of the republic. He was the commander of the Northern Ingermanland regiment that fought against the Bolsheviks. In addition to the Northern, South Ingermanland regiment also existed, which was striking at Petrograd, Peterburg from Estonia. Karl Gustav Mannerheim, also an officer of the Russian Tsarist army, then president of the independent Finland, offered white General Eugenich to take the city together. Yet the latter said that he supports one and indivisible Russia and does not recognize the independence of Finland and Estonia, not to mention Ingria. Independent North Ingria existed 2 years. Its state symbol was the flag of Ingermanland regiment and the historical coat of arms of Ingria of Swedish times, which later became the chevron of the Ingermanland infantry regiment formed by Peter the Great. According to the Tartu Peace Treaty of 1920, the territory of St. Petersburg was postponed by the history until better times. Ingria is a region with great touristic, scientific, industrial and transit logistic potential. Even today, with all kinds of obstacles from the central Moscow authorities and conducting an independent foreign economic activity, the St. Petersburg region is one of the few Russian regions. At the same time, more than 80% of the income forcibly goes to Moscow into the so-called federal budget of the Russian Federation. The Petersburg region is completely self-sufficient from the economical point of view. In case Ingria gains the political and economic independence, it quickly enters the numbers of economically developed countries of Europe. Ingria should and will seek to join all international organizations that would promote national independence and the international prestige of Ingria, first of which in the United Nations Organization, now United Nations. Furthermore, taking into account the historical experience and cultural identity, the accession of Ingria to the European Union and the North Atlantic NATO military bloc is likely to be only a matter of time. Russian is the native language for 90% of the region population. It is likely to become the official language of the country. Nevertheless, it's considering the history of the region based on the principles of linguistic equality and tolerance, a law will be adopted on regional languages, according to which in places of compact residence of representatives of relevant nationalities, the regional status with all their rights will be given to Finnish, Ijorian, Vodin, and Lepsian languages. The vast majority of Ingrian population is ethnical Russian. The theoretics for Ingermanland independence regard Ingria is the so-called St. Petersburg. Also, the majority of participants in the movement for the removal of Ingria insist that its territory includes both St. Petersburg and the entire current Leningrad region, without exception. St. Petersburg's population is 5 million residents, or Leningrad region 1.5 million inhabitants, of which 1 million is connected with St. Petersburg one way or another way. Petersburg local identity was established already in the period of the Russian Empire and has long been a fact. One of the most popular slogans among supporters of Indian independence. Ingria is a country, Petersburg is a nationality. So St. Petersburg is one of pearls of Europe. We have always been part of Europe geographically and culturally. In the time of the Tsars, in the Soviet times, and in the times of freedom in the 1990s. And today, we do not want to take part in the imperial wars of the Moscow Kremlin. We are against the war in Ukraine. Ukraine is part of Europe, and St. Petersburg and Ingria are also part of Europe. We want to go home to Europe. Let us come home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mezerin. And our next speaker comes from Austria, which has never been a part of Russia.
Sie haben das auch gesagt, dass wir occupied by Russia for 10 long years, and we have not forgotten how terrible that is. Thanks a lot for this opportunity, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Member of the Parliament. I'm very grateful for this invitation to Oleg and his team. This is a very historic conference and a very important opportunity, and I think will contribute to the improvement of the history of the European continent with the freedom of all your nations. I would like to start to present myself. I'm Günther Fehlinger from Austria, a neutral country, unfortunately, but we want to join NATO. I've initiated the Austrian People's Petition to look for a NATO membership. It's also very important in my committee to support the NATO membership of Kosovo, of Bosnia, and also of Ukraine. This is the way to peace, and also the European Union itself should be a member of the NATO alliance. This is very important. It's the only way, because never forget, this war is very much about this question, and we don't have to concede. This is the way for victory. This is my first initiative, and also the second one. Yeah, for Montenegro. Montenegro is very important for this conference. Please, all of you, you have to study the case of Montenegro. I appeal to learn the history of Montenegro. It was 90 years occupied by Serbia. It's now a NATO member. It's now on the edge of to be the European Union. It has the euro as currency. So Montenegro is free, and this is in NATO. And if Montenegro can be free in the NATO, why not Kuban? Why not Chechnya? So this is the role model, and this is important to study. I call also here the European Parliament for the membership of Montenegro in the European Union in 2024, because, ladies and gentlemen, we have also competition. The Russian and also the unfortunate nationalist government in Serbia is fighting in Montenegro a rollback campaign. They're doing that in many countries with disinformation. So the faster we do enlargement of the Western Balkan countries, starting with Montenegro, the better it is for the stability of Europe. That's very important. So please support Montenegro in the European Union. That's the strategic answer to the question, to the Russian war. Now let's come to 34 new countries instead of the Russian Federation. Strategically, ladies and gentlemen, we have always tried many things with Russia, like appeasement, buying energy from Russia, and it all failed. They still have attacked us. They have started this terrible war in 2022, and Mr. Member of the Parliament, I say we cannot allow such a terrible and terrorist federation east of us to continue. It's no longer in our strategic interest. We have tried many things with Russia in the last 100 years, but it led to this war. So having a big empire who potentially attacks us again, even when we now find some armistice maybe, but they might attack us again, and we always live in the shadow of such a terrorist state. That's absolutely wrong. So we have to dismantle Russia, and we have to support all your movements. This is very important for the coming future. How we organize it, I will explain it in detail. I have also a YouTube video about it, because I don't want to be too long. But we have, of course, to de-recognize Russia and to diplomatically, economically, and in all aspects isolate Russia at the moment. And then we have to have a very concrete plan for how to support each of your countries and how to do that and how to turn you into democratic, successful market economies
And that is the way inside the UN, of course, inside OSCE, the Council of Europe, and that's all, I think, the way which is very logically in the next moment. So I'm fully supporting the end of this conference. I'm from Austria. We started a terrible war, the First World War. We attacked our friends from Serbia in 1914. And I want to apologize for this terrible crime. As a result, Austria was dismantled. Let's look at the parallel. Russia has attacked Ukraine, it must be dismantled. That's the logic, yeah? And Austria was like this, a very big empire. Now it's 10 new countries, better countries. And look at Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a socialist dictatorship. And everybody said it will be forever. And no, it's now 7 new countries, and they all work much better. They are free, democratic, market economies. Some of them are in NATO already. All of them will be ultimately in NATO and in the EU. And this is the way, this is the role model. The dissolution of Yugoslavia is the role model for the dissolution of the Russian Empire in the future. And we all have to study that, to learn it, and to copy exactly this process. So, how it will be? The international community will not support you. America has not supported the end of the Soviet Union and has not supported the end of the Austrian Empire and has not supported the end of Yugoslavia. Never forget, George Bush was going to Kiev and said no to independence of Ukraine. The Chicken Kiev case. James Baker was going to Yugoslavia and said no to the breakup of Yugoslavia. And the Foreign Minister of America was until 1918 against the dissolution and the independence of Yugoslavia, Czech Republic and Czechoslovakia back then in 1918. But then something's changed. They decided to support, and it was the United States of America which was the most ardent supporter then later of the new states in Central Europe, for example, Czechoslovakia and others. So you have to change the public opinion in the United States. Study the biography of Mr. Masaryk. He was the leader to transform and to get the recognition of Czechoslovakia by the United States. So this biography, this history, how he did it, how he changed American public opinion is absolutely critical information for everybody here. I'm not so much in favor of what they did in it, the Italians or the Romanians. So I'm in favor of the breakup according to the Yugoslavian model, so along the republic lines. This is, I think, a much better way, and we need a European political and stable economic framework for the new states to come. Here again, Yugoslavia is the framework, and I've worked in many of the countries, like in Kosovo, Montenegro, Macedonia, and these are all working. We have a stable role model. Exactly this way to provide economic and political and military stability for ex-Yugoslavian states, we can copy right now, right there in the ex-Russian states, and it's working, and this must be based exactly like this. Yes, this is my slide. I have here George Bush. He was not supporting Ukraine, you remember. Here is the Chicken Kiev speech. It was James Baker in Tirana, but he was not supporting. We made many mistakes. But ultimately, when it then came to the war, it was the Americans who supported Croatian freedoms. Not forgot. They will change if you win the debate internally. Yeah, lessons for ex-Russia. It's of course important, and that's why this conference is so important, to prepare world opinion that it's totally normal to welcome the Prime Minister of Chechnya here in the European Parliament. But everybody of us, we have to learn the name of the new states. It must be completely normal to know Ingria and to know Königsberg and to know Chechnya and Ingushetia and all the new, even I cannot by heart say all the 34, and I want to apologize, but I will learn them. And each of us has to be disciplined to learn all the states of the names of the new countries and to support them, like Kuban, like Free Siberia, and this is a wonderful conference to exactly do that. So, because I'm an economist, I want to make very clear, we have to offer a stable economic framework for all the new countries. Because why the international diplomats and your American partners will say, no. Why? Because they think it will be chaos and it will be disaster. So where to do it? First of all, we need to currency stability. A currency must be pegged to the euro, like they did it in the Baltic countries and in Bulgaria, in the framework of trade agreements with the European Union, like we have a DCFTA with Ukraine. This is so important. So the same stability in the customs, in the trade system, in the currency system must be offered. The stability as the membership in the Council of Europe, in the OECD. So you have to make declarations of your new countries that you want immediately to be in the WTO, in the OECD, that you are totally aware of what the international responsibility of a new state is, and that the framework will be provided. And you can be as successful as Montenegro and Kosovo, and that should be always on your lips. And that's very important. Economics is very important in this case, but also the political framework is very important. Russia was until recently in the Council of Europe, so all your new countries can be in the Council of Europe, in the OECD, and that will be already a lot of political stability in this project. Yeah, concrete steps I have outlined. Ultimately, it's all important, as our friend from Kuban has said, the victory of Ukraine. We have to arm Ukraine. I want to use this opportunity in the European Parliament to criticize the German government for sending only 14 tanks. We need 140 tanks, not 14. Ukraine must be provided with enough tanks to win this war. It is a minimum of 300, which was demanded by President Zelensky. It's better to send 500. We have 2,000 tanks. If Ukraine wins this war, we don't need any tanks anymore in Europe, because we all will be peaceful partners in Europe. But we need now to send enough tanks to Ukraine, and of course we need also to send airplanes to Ukraine. It must be F-16s to Ukraine, and please America, please European Union, send the tanks and send the airplanes enough to liberate Mariupol this year, because we don't want to have a long war, we want to have a victory this year, and the liberation of Mariupol is essential for that. And here also, of course, the stability, because I'm an economist, I always mention, please Ukraine, you have also not done everything. Mechanism of Southeastern European stability, in the Regional Cooperation Council, in the Central European Free Trade Agreement, and also to peg the currency to the euro, and also best to adopt the euro as it was done in Montenegro, as it was done in Kosovo. And again, I repeat, everything we did, because I was also participating in these activities in the 2000s, and now it's very important that we repeat the success of Montenegro and Kosovo stability, political framework and economic framework in all the new countries, and it starts in Ukraine. Good. Here I have made two important things. Some of you might not know what we did in Southeastern Europe, and I meet a lot of people in Ukraine. I lived 4 years in Ukraine, and there was some kind of cultural prejudices that Ukraine is much better than Southeastern Europe, and we don't have to learn from. I published so many articles, please learn from Montenegro and from Kosovo, and still today Ukraine has not recognized Kosovo because they are afraid of Putin abusing this argument again. And that's a big mistake. If we don't believe in our own principles, in our own mechanisms, if Ukraine, for example, doesn't follow Western foreign policy because they think we know better what to do in the Balkans, that's a big mistake. So we have built up all these mechanisms. Dr. Buzek is my great hero, the former deputy prime minister who led Austria into the European Union. He passed away this year, unfortunately, last year, and he was the stability-backed coordinator. So what we immediately need is a stability pact for the post-Russian world, like it was decided in '99 for the Balkans. And this stability pact is already there, basically, with this institution. And this must be funded, and this must be supported. And here all the new states must be integrated immediately, because all this mechanism exists. No need to invent anything. I'm calling again here the European Parliament. It was one of the biggest mistakes to have Eastern Partnership separated from the Balkan process. As if this would be different things. There's only one European Union, there's only one NATO, you all want to join us? Yes, let's join together, and if we can do the integration of the Eastern Partnership countries into this mechanism, and then in the EU and NATO, that's of course the same mechanism for all the new countries which will develop out of the terrorist federation once it's defeated. How it will be defeated, very shortly here as well. The role model of ex-Yugoslavia is decisive. Of course, I cannot see in the future, but I can say what happened. It happened exactly. First, there was an armistice basically by the defeat of Serbia and of Milosevic in '99 by the Western intervention. Sorry, there will be no Western intervention, but via Ukraine, of course, to have a defeat of Russia. And then it was the withdrawal of the Russian troops, in that case of the Serbian troops from Kosovo in the armistice of '99. And then Milosevic, because theoretically it was a democracy, he had to do fake elections, or it was normal elections, but he had to stuff it because he had a defeat. And then it was so faked, the elections, and I'm talking about the 2024 elections of Putin, and there will be so much ballot stuffed, because that he will do for sure. He will maybe have a theoretical victory, but then it's the moment of revolution. Then it's the moment to prepare for a big uprising. At least it worked exactly that way, with Mrs. Albright's support in the case of Serbia. And on the 5th of October, as you know very much, we have a representative from the October group here from Serbia. It's also time for a new revolution there. But on the 5th of October 2000, Milosevic was toppled. And let's think about the scenario of Putin's fall in 2024 by the spring, a Russian spring, leading not to a free and democratic Russia, because that's a fallacy we have to fight, but to the independence of 34 new states who will be then supported by the West to be modern market democracies. And that's what we can learn from Yugoslavia, and I think that's a powerful, positive vision. And I say again, Montenegro is free, and so you will be free. Croatia is free, and so you will be free. Kosovo is free, and so you will be. And Ukraine is free and will win this war, and so you also will be free, and we will all win together. And that's basically my proposal, you know, to turn big, bad empires into good, small, modern market democracies. And I think that's what we should support intensively here from the European Parliament and the European institutions. And in conclusion, I have also a podcast. I'm again, of course, you know, allow me, I'm again promoting Austrian NATO membership, because that I need a lot of Bosnia and Ukraine. And here, this is my webpage and my podcast, my YouTube channel. And I will also stream this video and a lot of these activities on my YouTube channel. And thanks a lot for your attention. And Slava Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fellinger. Our next guest is unfortunately unpresent, Mr. Pavlo Klimkin, former foreign minister of Ukraine. So we have time for discussion. If there are some questions to our guest, please, the floor is to you. Yes?
Thank you so much for this very interesting panel discussion. I must say it's quite a rare opinion that I hear here in the European Union. I'm Ukrainian, so it was really interesting to see this point of view. And the question I wanted to ask is that today Russian Federation is one of the biggest countries with the nuclear weapons. So the question is, if we look at the scenario where we can make a lot of countries from the Russian Federation, what should we do with the nuclear weapon arsenal that is currently in Russian Federation, and that is actually their threat that they usually use here in their narratives to threaten European countries? Thank you so much.
Well, this is a very good question, because this red button is the one difference between Habsburg Empire and Russian Empire today. Well, we should ask after what we should do with this weapons after Russian falls, or before. Before, we can do nothing.
Yeah. You know, it's a bit exaggerated, the fear of the Russian nuclear weapons, because the basic principle is always that deterrence and mutually assured destruction works. I was raised as a young person in the Cold War in Austria. It was always like this. We learned it in school and we learned it in politics, you know. It's always clear, you know, they destroy us, we destroy them, we will destroy the whole world, so it will never happen. And our nuclear weapons, by the way, work. And if the Russians work, we have to see. And we will never see it because it's an absolute disaster and it will not happen. So the fear is, of course, there, and the fear we have to address. In the breakup of the Russian Federation, we will not attack Russia. Don't get it wrong. I think it was very clear. Don't have any hopes of NATO military intervention or anything like this. Even for Ukraine, NATO is doing only the minimum in terms of military supply. So don't think that this will happen. But what will happen is simply like it happened in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was armed to the maximum with nuclear weapons, and it fell apart peacefully into 15 new countries. And a similar process is easily manageable. Also, the Russian people want to live, so there is not this danger of escalation, nuclear size in any way. Given what will happen, the command will be very careful to keep the control, and so probably we will have a similar retrenchment, a kind of central Russian republic with a lot of nuclear arms, and there will be a lot of effort similar like to de-arm nuclear in Ukraine. There will be a transfer of the nuclear weapons to this central new core Russian state, and this is the most likely scenario to happen. And please don't lose any sleep about it, because the world will be safe. And again, the American nuclear weapons work for sure.
Thank you very much. Yes, optimism is what we need. Yes?
Can I say something about this question? Thank you very much. I will be translated or not. I would like to say in Russian.
Yes, of course.
Yes? Okay, thank you very much. This is the question, why Putin started this war? Путин эту войну начал именно рассчитывая на свое ядерное оружие. А то, что мы сегодня здесь обсуждаем, и те процессы, которые в России должны пойти по ее трансформации, это будут внутренние процессы. Да, конечно, сегодня Украина напрямую или Европа не вмешивается напрямую во внутренние дела России. И когда эти внутри этой страны, когда народы колониально зависимые от Российской империи уже несколько веков, после ее поражения в войне в Украине, естественно, эти процессы пойдут. И никто из тех, кто сегодня находится во власти или кто претендует прийти к власти в России, они ее не применят во внутренних конфликтах. И поэтому мы должны четко для себя определить. Украино-российская война – это агрессия со стороны России, и они должны быть призваны к ответу за содеянные и за преступления, совершенные. А те политические процессы, которые будут идти в самой России, они абсолютно в этом отношении гарантировано, что по Воронежу он ударит, или по какому региону, по Кубани, по Калмыкии, по какому региону он применит это ядерное оружие. Поэтому нам этого бояться ни в коем случае нельзя. Нам ни в коем случае нельзя прекращать дискуссии на тему, что должно произойти с Россией. Наш френд из Австрии очень правильно сказал, что если освободились другие страны, и сегодня очередь за Россией, и эту ситуацию спровоцировали сами русские. И сами русские должны быть заинтересованы в том, чтобы эта страна стала свободной и от ядерного оружия тоже, чтобы они жили нормально для себя, ради себя, а не против кого-то и не для того, чтобы кого-то покорить. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much, Ilya Konovayev, Congress of People's Deputies. I have a question to Honorable Feringer. Sorry, we're talking mostly with you because you had such a great speech just delivered to us. In the middle of February, there would be a meeting of OSCE in Vienna. Austria right now is the only country which still allows Putin's pundits to be issued visas and coming to participate in international congresses. I am wondering what kind of security and cooperation we are talking about with representatives of Putin's government and Putin's parliament. And maybe it would be a right idea with members of European Parliament from Austria, National Parliament of Austria, to create a real event with normal Russian people, which truly represent Russian people and not Putin's government at the same dates when would be OSCE meeting. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this information. I didn't know that, but I know, of course, that the Austrian government and the Austrian politics is heavily influenced by Russia. And you know, we have a big problem in Europe with energy, business, and the corruption attached. When I lived in Ukraine, I learned that basically 1% of the revenues which one country delivers to Russia will be used for political corruption in that country. And then I tried to understand my own country better. And that's basically how it happens, because Austria since 50 years is the hub of Russian gas influence in Europe, and we have started with these pipelines in the year 68, and that's why Putin came to the 50-year celebration. He concluded another contract to 40 years long for 7 billion to buy, we have to buy basically Russian gas from him. So this is basically how it works. 1% of 7 billion, you can buy a lot of Austrian politicians, and you can ensure that they know that they have this obligation to be very nice for you, even when you launch a war of aggression. And then Austria has just very much minimal compliance with the sanctions and has been just, you know, to be on both sides basically. But they have not really done anything courageous like the Czech Republic or others who have really sent a lot of diplomats home, Austria just a few, and to learn that now the representatives of Russia come back. I was so shocked. It was my most shocking experience in politics. In 2014, Putin has already attacked Ukraine, Crimea, and waged a war, and still in June he was invited as a state guest to Austria. And he was the red carpet, and the Austrians said, oh, you're such a great gentleman. It was the visit of shame in 2014 and in 18 again. So I apologize for the Austrian government. I don't represent it. I will fight on my social media activities and in the media against this visit. And yes, an event in Austria on that occasion with the real representative of the Russian nations would be very, very good. And I will work with Oleg, my thesis technologies. There will be a new Austria, there will be a European Austria, which will be also purged from this Russian influence. It will emerge out of this crisis and the transformation. And exactly that's why I invite everybody to support the NATO campaign, because this neutrality is always leading that we want to build a bridge, dance with Putin on weddings, and all these things which you might remember, which I'm really apologizing and I'm ashamed for.
Thank you very much. And our Ukrainian friend.
Hello everyone, NGO Promote Ukraine. My name is Kushmas. First of all, I want to be maximally grateful for members of European Parliament that you host these brave people here and give that their voice will hear it in Europe. So first of all, I want to reply to those who not yet done some things which I think very important, because I hear that many of our representatives said that when Ukraine win, we take power in our hands, etc. So I think that it will be fair if you create national battalions of your representative as a part of the Ukrainian armed forces and send them to fight on the side of Ukraine. Because if you all say when Ukraine will win, so it means that Ukrainians should to shed the blood for you, but it's ready you to shed your blood for Ukrainians. And it's very important. I think that I know that many, for example, like Ичкерия or region of, I'm sorry, forget. Bashkiria, yes. So I think that some of you already done it, but very important that all of you did do it. So my question is logical how I think. So who will legal successor of Russian Federation? Because for me important to understand who will pay reparation for Ukraine. Thank you.
Well, yes, it's also a very good question. but I'm afraid we are not able now to answer this question, but this question we should have it before eyes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we should end this part of the conference, but we have time in this afternoon and evening, so we will meet together again. Well, and some sentences to the end. Well, the Tsars and then the dictators of the Soviet Union and then President Putin, they wanted Europe and United States, the world, to see the Russian Empire, Russia, as a monolith. And the picture drawn today at this conference shows that it was and it is not true. There is a variety of countries, of lands in Russia, so it opens new perspectives after the war. And to the end, Slava Ukraine.
Thank you very much.
Я перейду, сейчас я с интервью разберусь, пока у нас по поводу меня.
На этом наша трансляция заканчивается. Спасибо всем, кто был с нами. Спасибо зрителям канала Ичкерия.
Перерыв.